Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started just to make sure we've got a lot of program to get through. So welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining excuse me, this session. And thank you so much to all of our speakers for being with us today. My name is Jessica Felt, and I'm the Preservation Initiatives Manager at Preservation Maryland. We're presenting today's session in collaboration with the Council for Maryland Archaeology as part of their April webinar series. So this is the third session in the series, and the final session will be next Thursday at 2 o'clock. And we're going to be putting up the council's website up in the chat for everybody. So if you would like to check out and get more information about the sessions, and I just saw it pop up, you can check that out. And this is also part of our 2021 webinar series, which is a series we began last year and continuing through while we're all still working from home in the pandemic. So more information and recordings of past sessions can be found at oldlinestatesummit.org, and we put that up in the chat as well. And I want to take a quick moment to thank our sponsors that help us out with our webinar series: Whiting Turner, Maryland Historical Trust, Worcester Eisenbrandt, Brennan and Company, the Rural Maryland Council, Rough Roofers, and the Middendorf Foundation. These sponsors, along with our donors, make it possible to present these sessions free of charge, and we really, really thank them for all of their support. Before I hand this over to Stephanie, I just wanted to go over how you can ask questions. At any point during the presentations, you can enter a question into the question box on your controls. And then at the end of the session, we'll have some time for Q&A and ask the panelists that have the questions that are entered into the question box. And finally, this session is being recorded. So this recording will be shared via email with all registrants. It'll also be up on our YouTube channel and our website. So if someone you know you think would really enjoy it, or someone that just couldn't join, please do feel free to share it with them. So now I'm going to hand the presentation over to Stephanie Sperling, who is the president for the Council for Maryland Archaeology.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you so much to Preservation Maryland. Yeah, as Jessica said, my name is Stephanie Sperling. I'm the president for the Council for Maryland Archaeology, and this is the middle of our April Maryland Archaeology Month webinar series. And we conceived of this webinar series long before the pandemic, before any of us had sat in a webinar, let alone 1,000 webinars. You know, during, you know, about the end of last year, we started to talk about topics for this webinar series. Last week, we talked to students about how to get a job in archaeology. Next month, we're talking about the topic for Maryland Archaeology Month. This year, it's very topical. It's the archaeology of healing in medicine. But one thing we kept coming back to was the notion of this relic hunting craze. You know, during the pandemic, it's become very popular and very normalized for families to, you know, looking for socially distanced outdoor activities. You know, let's go and find history on our own. And you know, the professional archaeology community, I think, in many ways, sort of spent a lot of time wringing our hands about this. We didn't do a lot to reach out to people who were doing these things. And this also, you know, comes on the heels of historically, archaeologists have done a lousy job at reaching out to avocational archaeologists, metal detectorists, and other people who are genuinely interested in history. And that's what we all share, is this real genuine love and passion for history. So we decided to have this conversation today, and I would just like to personally thank our panelists. I think it's going to be a great conversation. Please participate, drop your questions in the chat. We'd love to hear from you as well. And yeah, I'd like to thank you all for coming today. So now I'm going to pass it over to our moderator, the president-elect for the Council for Maryland Archaeology, Craig Lukasik. Thank you.
Hi, I just want to do a quick introduction of myself. I'm currently the Cultural Resource Manager for the Navy. I've been the past president of the Archaeological Society of Delaware, which worked with avocational archaeologists. I've served as a historic archaeologist for the Delaware Historic Preservation Office, and I've worked as a highwayman at the Virginia Department of Transportation. Also, I've participated in battlefield archaeology with Wade, Katz, and Bravo. This webinar will address the conflicts between relic hunters and archaeologists, and hopefully present some solution. Years ago, I attended a festival at my favorite historic district, It is truly beautiful. The residents really care about the landscape. In their houses, though, they proudly presented displays of artifacts on their kitchen table. It seems they allow bottle hunters to dig their privies and wells and then split the treasures. As a SHPO archaeologist, I realized I had failed to communicate to them that context is everything. In reading a favorite author of mine, Ben Aronovich, a British author, he notes that when investigating a murder at a house, you'll find shards of broken glass. Shards of broken glass. Does it matter if the shards are inside the house or outside the house? What's the difference? He also states that if you are digging in an old house and you find a 1776 penny with King George's profile on it, does it matter if that coin was found in the foundation, in the wall itself, or in the filled cellar, along with projectile points and tinfoil? The point is context tells the story. Context is everything. We are really fortunate that we have a distinguished panel of leaders in our field who have volunteered their time to be here with us today. First, I'd like to introduce Claude Bowen. He is a tireless advocate for avocational archaeology. He has held various offices in the Archaeological Society of Maryland and currently serves as the president. Claude was born and raised on a small tobacco farm in Calvert County. He graduated from Marshall University with dual major in history and philosophy and dual minors in French and in geology. Claude has had a distinguished career as a planner, a manager, and a director of financial concerns for the city of Baltimore and various private companies. The next is Matthew McKnight. He is the chief archaeologist of the Maryland Historical Trust, which is also the State Historic Preservation Office for Maryland. He received his bachelor's from Southeast Missouri State University. He's earned his MA and his PhD in anthropology from Penn State University. His dissertation focuses on the prehistoric trade and exchange with native copper in the Great Lakes area. In October of 2019, he edited and authored, here's a plug for your book, several articles in the book. I highly recommend it. Good. Next is Matt Reeves. Matt is the director of archaeology at James Madison's Montpelier in Orange County. He has earned his bachelor's from George Mason University and his master's and PhD from Syracuse University. Reeves has focused on public archaeology, especially involving descendant groups and experimental learning with the public. His specialty is sites of African diaspora, including plantation and the freedmen periods, as well as Civil War sites. In 2012, the Archaeological Department of James Madison's Montpelier began an experimental program working with Detectorists. It was a week-long experience in which archaeologists and metal detectors worked together to identify and preserve archaeological sites in Montpelier. One of the participants in this program is Scott Clark. Scott is an IT professional who joined Matt at Montpelier. He has developed the Kentucky Unearthed website, which is where like-minded archaeologists, historians, hobbyists, and history buffs can bring individual strengths, passions together to capture and interpret and preserve the stories beneath their feet. Scott is on the front line of these issues. He encourages relic hunters to learn archaeological field methods for capturing thieves of all objects before moving them from the soil. Now, we'll let them give their presentations. We'd like to start with Claude.
Good morning, or I guess it's good afternoon for some of us. I wanted to talk today about relic hunting, looting, collecting, and selling, because I think they're interrelated. Let me just say a couple of things in advance. First of all, I'm probably going to look like the goat in the among the fold of sheep in this group today, because I have a fairly strong view on this topic. Secondly, I don't believe that all relic hunters are evil. I am reminded of the Simpsons episode where Homer's about to smoke a cigarette and a self-righteous young woman comes up, slaps him hard, and says, "You're worse than Hitler." Well, most relic hunters and collectors are not worse than Hitler. Let me be clear on that. We have one today on our panel who is certainly not worse than Hitler. In fact, he's better than most. can I get can you move the slide, please?
Okay. How do we do
It
the
should
slide?
be coming up in just a second.
It takes just a
There we
moment.
go. Thank
Yeah.
you.
All right, here's the problem as I see it. The problem is that there are two almost diametrically opposed views concerning the legitimate uses of cultural materials from the past. Some artifacts are beautiful and are important, and in and of themselves, even without provenience and documentation, they have importance. Collectors tend to view on possession of the most perfect, rarest of artifacts without regard to the context in which it's found. The object itself becomes the most important thing driving most collectors. I'm a collector myself of Roman coins, and I can tell you, I don't ask questions as long as I can tell that it's not a fake, which there are many. I just want the best that I can afford, and I think most relic hunters do the same. I think archaeologists don't generally understand the motivations which drive collectors and often feel duped after collaborating with them. Collectors tend to use archaeologists, I feel, to identify and certify the authenticity of their collections. As president of the State Archaeological Society now and in the past, I would get endless phone calls, wanting me to help to identify sites for relic hunters, which I would not do, of course, or to authenticate and certify their collections of having X value, which I have no idea what it is. I think there's a real poker game going on when we sit down and talk to a collector or a collector/relic hunter. They're trying to give you as little information as possible because no collector in his right mind is going to give you the location of his sacred pile of goodies, and no archaeologist is in his or her right mind is going to give them the information that they would really like to have. So again, I saw one of Scott's a little bit of Scott's presentation a moment ago, and there was a big Venn diagram, and he had lots of things that came right in the middle where the two circles overlap. My Venn diagram would be a lot smaller. It would overlap, but only very, very small. So this is the problem as I see it. Now, again, this is my limited experience, mostly in the state of Maryland. So can we get the next slide, please? Yeah, I'm sorry that this is so wordy, but I am not a high-tech kind of guy, as the panel would tell you from trying to get me straight on this thing earlier. Stories that some relic hunters and collectors tell themselves. Relic hunters and collectors often tell themselves, and sadly others, that they're archaeologists. Relic hunters and collectors tell themselves that archaeologists are interested primarily in obtaining museum pieces. And since they believe that, and that our primary focus is on obtaining interesting objects, they don't see any reason for them not obtaining interesting objects, either through digging or through sale. Relic hunters and collectors see themselves in competitions with persons, in their mind, having the same goals as themselves. So they have no problem in treating sites as private treasure troves until virtually any cultural material and features of any value to the archaeologist are severely depleted. And then finally, there's the Huckleberry Finn Norman Rockwell excuse. The little country boy who's walking through the fields and his big toe stubs his big toe on an artifact and picks it up and goes home and puts it in a cigar box. And it's all very quaint, but things have gotten a lot rougher and tougher in the collecting and looting world. Could we have the next slide, please? There we go. All right, stories that collaborating archaeologists tell themselves. When I say stories, I'm using the term often slightly in the same way that my Edwardian grandmother used the term, because I never heard her call anyone a liar, prevaricator, or dissembler. So, you know, we all tell our stories like this. Archaeologists often say that their collaboration with relic hunters is justified by the Willie Sutton excuse. Willie Sutton was the famous bank robber that was asked why he robbed banks, and he said because that's where the money is. Well, archaeologists often say their collaboration with relic hunters and collectors is justified by the fact that they know where the sites are. Archaeologists make themselves believe that any site that is pointed out to them by relic hunters will still have enough intact features to give meaningful information. It may or may not, but it certainly will have a lot less of that meaningful information. And finally, archaeologists forget Friedrich Nietzsche's famous saying from Beyond Good and Evil, which is one of my favorite books. If you gaze long enough into the abyss will gaze back into you. This is something I think, because this is a big ethical problem. That's why we're here today talking about it. And I believe that it's not good for us to collect. I mean, to work with collectors and relic hunters. It only legitimizes them, and I know there are many good ones, and I'm perfectly willing to be persuaded with that. And there are many. I noticed that Maryland just put up a new app today for people who pick up odds and ends in a field or in their lawn or wherever, so that will certainly help some of this. But I think it's an issue we have to be very careful with this. I'm not really willing to go out and start, doing kumbaya with these folks. Easy, Scott. And could I have the next slide, please? You can see Friedrich Nietzsche there. He was gazing into the abyss. Yes, I thought I'd do that. And then there's finally the filthy lucre of the buying and selling of artifacts. The problem of the sale of artifacts is a worldwide phenomenon. It always has been, actually. Lord Elgin's snatching of the so-called Elgin marbles from the Parthenon is an excellent example. Even today, museums and other institutions tend to ask very few questions about how their objects are obtained. The Museum of Modern Art in New York is a prime example. The Getty Museum in California, another. The internet and rising fortunes in countries such as China, Russia, India, and others has increased the number of collectors exponentially. And if you want, if you want to see just a small piece of this, go on the internet to a site called V-Auctions, and just go to the artifact section. It's endless. You can buy there a Homo erectus hand axe. You can buy North African Neolithic points, the beautiful ones too. You can buy Greek pottery from southern Italy. You can buy Roman and Byzantine earrings that are absolutely beautiful. But what makes me concerned is they seem to have them in pairs, and you know where that comes from. That doesn't come from somebody kicking up a clod of earth while they're plowing their farm. London, New York, and Zurich are big magnets right now for all kinds of cultural materials. Also, if you want a nice cone from a temple, said dedication of the Sumerians, they got it. I'm sure it come from the Baghdad Museum some years ago. There's a robust market for collections and collectors and materials for Native American materials. Large artifact shows take place each year here in Salisbury, Maryland, even. U.S. historical artifacts are found in some antique shops. Some have the artifacts. Some of the artifacts that I've seen still have their labels on them. They're labels. Now, I know there are deaccessionings going on, but it does make you wonder. And now fakes have been a problem for collectors for centuries now. And there are countries that specifically do false artifacts, such as Bulgaria, Mexico, and Central to South American countries seem to be a source of them. But this goes back a long time. There was a man named Calvino in Renaissance Italy who, because there were so few big Roman medallions to meet demand from these Renaissance folks who suddenly interested in the past. He started creating them, and they keep coming up on the market all the time.
Okay.
Wilhelm
Thank you,
Becker.
Claude.
Yeah, Wilhelm Becker. I'll be 1 minute. Wilhelm Becker has done did some great work in the first quarter of the 19th century, and his Greek coins are almost impossible to see, to tell the difference. Just if you just move it one more time here. This is an artifact show that took place recently in the Midwest for North American, Native American artifacts, and this is only a small piece of the show. So these folks are, you can see a fellow there with his wallet coming out. These are people. There's a very strong market in all of these kinds of artifacts. And let's do one more. Just give you one more thing. If you're in the market for something interesting, you can buy. Here's something you can buy today. If you look closely, this is the vertebrae from a young buffalo. And look at the point. Now, if you've got $2,500 and you're ready to spend it on something good, this is what you would buy. This is all kinds of things just like this. Thank you. Looking forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thanks, Claude. Next one up is Matt. Okay.
Let me see if I can show my screen here.
Great. Thank you.
Is everybody seeing my presentation there?
Yeah.
All right. Let me go for maximize. Okay, great. So hi again, everybody. My name is Matt McKnight, and I'm the Chief Archaeologist at the Maryland Historical Trust, or MHT. And I know that most of the archaeologists that are logging in know who MHT is and what we do. But for those of you who are a little less familiar with our role, the Maryland Historical Trust is the state agency that is dedicated to preserving and interpreting the legacy of Maryland's past for current Marylanders and future residents of the state. And we are a part of the Department of Planning, and MHT serves also as the State Historic Preservation Office for Maryland. So every state has a SHPO's office or State Historic Preservation Office, and it's really those are the repositories for all the historical sites, the standing structures, the archaeological sites, and what have you that the records for those are kept at the State Historic Preservation Office. And a big part of our mission is archaeology. I work with a staff of 6 other archaeologists at MHT, as well as occasionally with a number of archaeologists, curators, and conservators at the Jefferson Patterson Park and Museum, where the Maryland Archaeological Conservation Lab is. That is also a part of MHT and the Department of Planning. So what I wanted to talk about today, a few things I wanted to talk about in preparation for the webinar. Stephanie Sperling, who you heard from earlier, had forwarded all of us a document from a few years ago that really kind of jogged my memory a lot. It jogged my memory about a lot of the thoughts that I had at the time the statement came out, which are pertinent to our discussion today. And that the link to that's already been thrown up in the chat earlier, but I have also put it up there at the top of this slide. So there's a shorthand version of the link at the top of the screen. So you can have a look at the full document if you'd like. It's not very long. It's only about 1 page long, but it's the Society for American Archaeology's 2018 statement on collaborations between professional archaeologists and private artifact collectors who hold legally obtained collections. These are individuals that they refer to as responsible and responsive stewards. So this document, I think, highlights several points I wanted to make. I'm not going to go over it point by point, but I wanted to call out a few issues it addresses, some of which I still have qualms about, and others that I agree with wholeheartedly. And the first statement, the first thing that I would point out is that the document as a whole seems to define responsible and responsive stewardship purely in terms of legality of collection ownership. And I, at least personally, feel that responsibility entails a little bit more than that, and I'll come back to that in a moment. The statement goes on to make the point not in these words exactly, but it makes the point that acknowledging that something happens or that something happened in the past is not the same thing as condoning it or encouraging its continuance. And I can agree with that. In fact, I do agree with their statement that goes on further. In fact, archaeologists stand to gain a lot from working with collectors and relic hunters to document the locational and contextual data that they do have, provided they are willing and interested in sharing the knowledge, sharing the information, and that they acquired these collections legally. Unfortunately, that may entail having real honest conversations about things that that metal detectorists, relic hunters, artifact collectors maybe haven't thought about a whole lot. One of the big ones being conservation. And so this is just an image that I stole from the Mac Labs Conservation Standards Technical Update number 1. And we all, professional archaeologists, know, unfortunately, too much from experience that it's rare to find a collection in private hands that's been really well conserved and curated, particularly where historic collections in metals are concerned. And honestly, just want to put this out there, metal detectorists, if you're watching this, YouTube is not your friend. We've seen too many cases where some sort of homebrew YouTube chemical bath has been used and followed up with a coat of spray Rust-Oleum to fix an artifact. Not good. There is simply no substitute for the work that a professional conservator can do with all the right equipment, the right supplies, and the skill and know-how to conserve an object. So this is, again, where I sort of disagree with the statement a little bit. Responsible collection should entail more than just getting a landowner's permission. Responsibilities, to me, is an ongoing thing. And professional archaeologists, I think, should really challenge metal detectorists and collectorists to think long-term about curation and conservation. If you believe that your work is really about preserving the past, think about, can I adequately preserve this object that I'm collecting? And I do have to also say to professional archaeologists, we don't always do the best job of setting a great example in that regard. So lots of us have participated in digs, some conducted by large public institutions, where curation and conservation were really kind of secondary concerns. And we need to do a better job ourselves. Let's see. So getting back to the statement, another major point that the statement makes, and this is a really important one, is that excavation of archaeological sites should be undertaken under the supervision of a professional archaeologist. And I will die on this hill. So I'm not just talking about the egregious examples, right? There was a news piece that I saw recently which promoted a particular group of metal detectorists. Again, it's one of these news pieces that we keep seeing a lot of go out and do this during the pandemic. You can socially distance, you can walk around outside, it's great. I'm not going to say the name of the group, but it was sort of promoting this as, you know, these individuals as preservers of history. And when you actually went to their webpage and looked at what was going on, their digging was not just destructive of sites, but it was actually dangerous. They were digging holes into historic privies and middens that they could collapse very easily. And then if you dug a little further into their website, the history that they were preserving is actually being auctioned off in artifact mystery bags on eBay. Now, that's an egregious example. That's just simply not someone I think we as professionals are ever really going to see eye to eye with. But that's not necessarily all artifact collectors, all metal detectorists. And so we've got to be very careful of not classifying the folks who are trying to do the right thing in with the folks who we're just never going to see eye to eye with. But it does have to be acknowledged, there is a lot of well-meaning destruction of intact archaeological sites that we know happens when someone with a lot of passion, a lot of interest in history, and possibly a lot of good motivations behind what they're doing simply doesn't have the skill or training necessary to document a site adequately. We always have to preach as archaeologists that archaeological sites are non-renewable resources, and that it isn't just about the recovery of artifacts, but really the thorough documentation of context and the spatial dimension and the relationship of the artifacts to one another. If these things aren't documented adequately the first time, you don't get a second chance. And that's a story that I think the public needs to hear. That's just, something that metal detectorists and others need to constantly hear repeated to them. I was recently copied on some correspondence from a collector who stated, well, the types of sites I've been working on are places you wouldn't really be interested in, mostly old privies and trash pits. And it's like, what? That's exactly the types of sites that we are interested in. So again, I will die on this hill. Excavation should be undertaken only under the supervision of a qualified archaeologist. So the SAA statement did come up with 5 recommendations for working with responsible and responsive stewards of legally acquired collection. Again, you can take a closer look at those by going to the link that was put up earlier. The first one, I wanted to highlight a couple of them. The first one I wanted to mention is at the bottom, actually, of the slide, number 5. And that's to encourage responsible and responsive stewards to join organizations and programs that provide training to increase their archaeological knowledge and skills and make it easier for them to share their knowledge with archaeologists. The Archaeological Society of Maryland is obviously an organization that fits that bill. And for those of you that are at home, you should Google Maryland Archaeology. Doesn't matter how you spell archaeology, it will be the first hit. It provides the Archaeological Society of Maryland provides just such an opportunity to the public where they can work with professional archaeologists at the annual field session in archaeology and other sites throughout the state. I know that other organizations throughout the state maintain lists of ways you can get involved in archaeology locally, but participating in these types of activities does require subscribing to a certain set of principles and ethics about the treatment of sites and artifacts. What we don't have in Maryland is an equivalent organization for metal detectorists, and this is something that I would really like to explore more. So this is one of the reasons I'm highlighting this one. Maybe that's an entirely new organization. Maybe there's an existing group that would like to step up, or maybe it could be an ASM chapter focused on metal detecting. But in any event, there would need to be a code of ethics involved in such an organization. The other recommendation, number 2 up there, I've pulled out of this document, is where possible, encourage responsible and responsive stewards to work with a professional or avocational archaeologist to record and document sites and collections, and to enter that information in the state archaeologists or state historic preservation office's files. And obviously that caught my attention as the chief archaeologist working for the state historic preservation office. And to that end, I did want to mention this this app that we have released recently. It was a brainchild of a colleague of mine, Dr. Zach Singer. Myself, we started having a conversation about ways we could create an app that would allow people to more easily report isolated finds or locations that they thought might be a site, but they didn't really necessarily have the skills or know about the Maryland Inventory of Historic Properties archaeological site form. We've always had the ability to report sites, but this would give them the ability when they found something they don't know what it is to get the information to us, and we could respond to them. And just a quick little demo here. This app gives the user the ability to geotag a photograph. They can either select an image that's already on their phone or take a new photograph with the app. You can set the location of the find using the geolocation service that's already built into your phone, or actually just clicking the dot on the map. It gives you the ability to describe the find. So what type of basic artifact is it? There's a drop-down menu to help you select, or if it doesn't fall into one of those categories, you can type one in. And then finally, you have the ability to, there's a link provided to the Jefferson Patterson Park and Museum Diagnostic Artifacts in Maryland, so you can actually look at some of these objects, make a decision as to what you think it might represent, and then get back to the app and enter that in there, enter in the type of artifact that you think it is that you're looking at. And then you can put in your contact information, any additional comments that you have. And if my fat fingers would type a little more carefully, I could actually spell this correctly. Here, eventually I'll get it. You can put the comments in, your name, and then your contact information should you wish to actually be contacted by one of the professional archaeologists at the Trust. So that's it for me. I just wanted to kind of point out some of the issues that, looking over that statement by the SAA kind of prompted thoughts from me. And with that, I will stop sharing, and I look forward to any questions people have at the end.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, Matt Reeves, are you ready?
Yes, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen for my presentation. And all right, can everybody see my screen now with the, okay. Well, yeah, as Craig introduced me, I'm Matt Reeves, Director of Archaeology at Montpelier. Montpelier is located in Central Virginia. So, and we're obviously the home of James and Dolly Madison, fourth President of the United States, but also more importantly for archaeology, and what we work with metal detectorists on is over 300 enslaved individuals who built, maintained, worked, and lived at Montpelier. And back in 2012, we started doing programs with metal detectorists, and really the main goal with this was to get metal detectorists excited about archaeology, and not just any part of archaeology, but get archaeologists excited about what Craig and Matt are talking about, which is the context of archaeology, is, finding artifacts in a context, not just the artifacts themselves, but why the location is so important. And then the other is, the importance of the analysis of assemblages and the complete, looking at all parts of the assemblage. And so when we started these programs in 2012, we were wondering how we're going to get, metal detectorists excited about, finding nails and plotting them out. And what we decided to do is take advantage of our site, which is our goal at Montpelier is to find and preserve the sites dating to the period of enslavement, and more particularly the ones dating to the retirement years of the 1820s, and begin to restore these sites back to the landscape. So what we did with metal detectorists is, immediately began then with tours of the landscape, showing why we're doing what we're doing. And what we found, well, metal detectorists were excited about that. What they were actually most excited about is actually working with this, our archaeological staff and the metal detectorists, the programs that we run. They spend a week at Montpelier, living on the grounds and working side by side with the staff. And really, within the first day, there's a bond of common interest in terms of looking at history from the standpoint of material culture. And one of the ways we emphasize the importance of not just the shiny objects, the coins, is almost fetishization that we have about nails, because nails are how we find all these sites, whether it's a tobacco barn, whether it's a work area. Without nails, there'd be no way to locate the sites using metal detector surveys, and it allows us to locate sites we'd never be able to locate through standard archaeological techniques. So with one thing the metal detectorists walk away with is not only a better understanding of why nails are important and in the broader context of getting beyond just the pretty artifact, but also just the absolute adherence to gridded metal detector surveys. And one thing that we were really worried about with these programs is like, oh my goodness, what if metal detectorists, the only thing they want to do when they leave the program is learn how to set up a grid on their site so they find all the artifacts. Well, when metal detectorists leave, that's not what they've been asking us. What they've been asking us is, when I get back home to Idaho or back to Maryland, how do I contact local archaeologists so I can work with them and do what I did at Montpelier, which is basically work as part of the team. And so what we did is we've decided about 5 years ago, we started inviting archaeologists to come on these programs and pair them up with metal detectorists. And how we advertise this for archaeologists is we found, telling archaeologists to come to learn how to work with metal detectorists, a lot of them, the mind was made up not to do that. But when we talked about getting, archaeologists learning how to use their metal detector machines better by working with archaeologists and metal detectorists that knew how to use their machines, they became very interested. And after 2 or 3 days of working with metal detectorists who are also in the program and having them paired up, the conversations went from how do I use my machine to how do I have you come to my site and help me out on the surveys we're doing. And so one of the best results I think we've had is pairing archaeologists up with metal detectorists and having them begin to work with each other on sites outside of Montpelier. So they come to Montpelier to understand why all the context and the whole assemblages are important. And a big part of this is our overall program that we do. Metal detecting is just one part of our experiential based programs. The beginning is part of an acronym called LEARN, Locate, Excavate, Analyze, Reconstruct, and Network. The first part of this locate is locating the sites with metal detector surveys. The most of the programs we run are actual excavation programs where people are a unit excavating and recovering the site contextually. We also do the lab analysis program, which is analyze, and then finally is reconstruct, where folks come to learn how to actually reconstruct the buildings we've located through ghosting and non-invasive means of representing these sites in the landscape. And all this is the acronym for LEARN, which N is network, for showing this whole cycle of why we do archaeology. It's not just about, it isn't just, the science isn't for the science itself, it's to recover information that otherwise would not be accessible to really round out the parts of history that aren't there. And one thing we emphasize with metal detectorists is our work with the Montpelier descendant communities. These are descendants of slaves at Montpelier who work with us today. And what they've been interested in is finding the sites of labor at Montpelier. This is a shot of the area we're working on for the next 5 years, the visitor center here. The field slave quarters are the reconstructed buildings. This is one of the first sites we worked on with metal detectorists back in 2012. And actually a lot of the metal detectorists have gone through the entire cycle of locate, with the metal detector surveys, excavate, come back on excavation programs, the analysis, and the reconstruction. So a big part of what we're interested in doing with metal detectorists is showing, and gets to Stephanie's point of why we do archaeology. What's the importance of recovering this site information to, not just for the artifacts themselves, but for telling the stories about the people of the past that we want to, shed more light on. So the metal detector programs, I think we've got some links to our programs that Jessica has provided, and look forward to this discussion, and look forward to hearing next from my friend Scott. So thank you, Craig. I will stop sharing.
Great, thank you, Matt, very impressive. Okay, Scott, what are your thoughts? There we go.
Okay, I'm still I have not received the screen share capability yet. So if you could do that for me.
So I sent that to you and I can see your screen.
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Yeah.
Okay, we can see the picture here with me and yellow GPS around my neck.
Correct.
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. I'm Scott Clark. I am the amateur of this bunch. I come from a long 30 years of metal detecting, first as a hobbyist, and then most in the last 10 years as a much more serious amateur, learning a little bit here, a little bit there, working on archaeology projects, mostly in Kentucky, but all over the country, including Montpelier and Gettysburg, 96, Fort Revolutionary, Civil War, mostly conflict sites. And I've picked up a lot more than just the lingo. I've actually learned to grid map. I've learned to do basic GPR work. I've learned to do resistivity and other remote sensing, but I'm very much an amateur, and I do have at least a big toe in the relic hunter community. I have run some very large online groups before of the Relic Hunter community and done my best to sort of inject a little bit of understanding about archaeology as I see it, because I'm more accepted than that group as an amateur. I am also tolerated by a number of organizations around the country because I have moved this way, and I do have I'm very familiar with the team here in Kentucky, all the way at the Historic Preservation Office down, including University of Kentucky and others. So I do have a pretty decent cohort supporting us, and we have won awards here in Kentucky for our archaeology work, and I'm also published, co-published and presented at all the major conferences for historical conflict archaeology projects that we worked on. So I've been through a little bit of what these other folks have been through a lot of. I do believe that here's my Venn diagram, Claude, that we have a lot of things in common, but there are very different motivations along the line. I'm not going to read all these to you, but mostly the artifact-centered group is on the left, and the site and provenance group is on the right, but they all have a lot of central shared passions about history once you get down to it and actually have a conversation. A lot of people in the Relic Hunter community are doing this on their days off. They consider it their recreation time. It is, they have very little daylight, as they say, to burn. And so when we come in and attempt to introduce rigor, such as things such as GPS recording, these apps that you've talked about, all these other things, they have to be convinced that it's worth using their daylight for this. What is it that they are actually achieving? Now, my experience is that we have a continuum of people in the metal detecting world, but most of the time among the archaeology community and the reading I'm doing, it's been painted with a single brush. But in fact, there is a pie chart you could draw of the relic hunting community with a pretty decent sized group who are at least willing to be involved and willing to learn and willing to be part of projects in a way where it's high data, the data sets are very high quality, where they are not collecting artifacts, where they participate in curation, they participate in the actual hard work of an archaeology site in addition to swinging their metal detector. And I am happy to believe that I'm part of that group too. The work that I have done here in Kentucky includes working with the level of the guidance from University of Kentucky Department of Anthropology's published guidelines for collections. And that goes all the way to the field, to collection of data. I collect data at sub-meter GPS settings. I've leveraged technology to the extreme on trying to improve the quality of the data. And I know when a site's heavily disturbed and when they're not, when they should be left alone for centimeter grade, when they've been plowed for 100 years, sub-meter in a battlefield situation is probably as good as you're ever going to get with an archaeology team too. So I do take care of those things. I think about those things, and I encourage the relic hunting community to think about it also. The issues that I see in the archaeology community is a basic missteps in PR and marketing of the archaeology world to this cohort of metal detectorists. There's a lot of mythology that persists. There's a lot of toxic assumptions that exist there. And when you finally sit down and talk with a significant number of these people, you start to get a lot of nods around the table. People start to understand what you're getting on about when it comes to context and provenance and why you're asking for what you're saying. But in fact, the worst of the worst is what makes it into archaeology conversations. The worst examples, the most egregious destructions of sites are what is brought up. The buying and selling of collections. I will tell you now, I have zero collection. I do not have a collection. Everything's been curated into public ownership, or it's been curated to the landowner with notes for any archaeology that comes down the pipe, with instructions to please don't take this with you if you move. So the ideas here, and these are landowner requests for metal detecting kind of things. The other thing that's not really discussed much with the applications excluded here is the advances in technology and accuracy that is available to amateurs. We have now sub-meter capabilities for less than $500 out there with Big Elf or Bad Elf, for example, and centimeter level technologies that are really on the horizon for actual with 30-second fix times. So the ability to collect at least horizontal surface collection data is there. Now, that is not the data set that you want from an archaeology project, but it's a lot better than someone remembering only thing they have is in their memory of where they actually picked these things up, and when they're gone, so is all that information. So the technology is there also. I think that another problem that I hear is that the amateur community is ignored. If they participate in an archaeology project or they become part of it by reporting something, and then there's data published, they are not mentioned, or they're mentioned as a man with a metal detector. These kinds of things, you know, it's like they don't even have a name. And I hear things on my groups about archaeology talking down to them, not treating them as a person. We're like sifted dirt to them, I saw. And you know, these are responses to me saying, no, they're really good people. They're really fantastic people to spend time with. Just, you know, give it a chance and all. But there's a lot of work to do on, I think, a marketing side of archaeology in general. And I hope that improves over time. People really, this is a metal detecting squad. I know a couple of these people online, but they like to be part of a team and be doing something. And they like it more than taking things home. That is more, makes it more fun. So there's these groups of people that get together, and I know that people just love to be part of a team. You know, here we are in Gettysburg. This is archaeologists blended with metal detectorists, blended with historians. None of us took anything home from the National Park Service site. This is a group of people who were in it for the camaraderie, the memories. We took photographs, we took photo collections out, but we didn't take any artifacts, and it was a fantastic week of work. I also believe, and this is I'm not going to try to make you read my flow chart, but the archaeology process itself has a lot of places where the relic hunting community can participate. They shouldn't be relegated to just equipment operators for one day in a 40-day project. They have lots of good contributions to research questions, to interpretation, to actually the documents that you're publishing. You know, there's a lot more that can be done there. So I'm an advocate for seeking out these people that are willing and interested to participate, and then making sure that they're finding this middle ground where the rigor reaches the level where the archaeologists can work with them without worrying about the outcomes. That's all.
Great, thank you, Scott. Very, very thoughtful. Jessica, do you have the questions? Okay.
Yeah, just give me 1 second. I'm going to just switch back over to me. Okay, let me turn on my camera as well. Thank you guys so much. We did get in a bunch of questions, and just to remind everybody, we do have some to start with. But if you do have a question, please type it into the box. One we just got in was kind of a brass tacks question, which is, are there local and/or state laws that protect archaeological sites, which would make it illegal to damage sites?
It depends on which locality you're in. There's overall federal regulations where you cannot do detectoring or relic hunting on federal property, and it depends on which state you're in, but there are regulations on state, and some localities have regulations too. So it's a patchwork of regulations. But I would stay, but definitely not on federal property and probably not on state property. Does that sound right, Matt?
Definitely not on state property. If it's state owned, you have to go through our office to get a permit to do any kind of digging.
The same in Kentucky, exactly the same here in Kentucky.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, we did get also a couple, I will be passing along these questions to the panelists. We did get a couple people who have formed partnership programs or committees that deal with these issues that were interested in sharing their contact information with everybody. So I will make sure to get those contacts over to you. There's a question about the app. Does the, for you, Matt, does the app work worldwide or is it just a Maryland app?
It's really just a Maryland app. It's sending the data directly to us in the state of Maryland. So, you know, we're taking a look at it. Obviously, some stuff that comes in is you know, photos of pointy rocks or things that aren't indicative of cultural activity, but we kind of have to go through and vet those things and determine, oh, is this actually coming from a known site or is this something new that we're looking at? But it's coming to our office in the state of Maryland, so it's not really designed to work elsewhere.
There are, by the way, the Detectorist community have become quite advanced at using some of the third-party GPS systems on the market, including connecting them to the sub-meter systems and receivers. I think that a lot of people don't realize that those can export a more portable format, such as KVM or and if they wish to share points of interest or other things with archaeologists, those files can be attached to email. And I've never seen an archaeologist go and lock down what you send them. They're generally interested in that. But I've exported numbers of KVM files to attach to an email discussing something that we want to talk about. And most of the good apps on the app stores have the ability to export that way into the cloud, like onto Google Drive.
Thank you.
Okay, we had a two-part question, so I'm going to start with the first part. One is, how do you identify responsible and responsive stewards?
Can you repeat that? It didn't come through.
Sure. How do you identify responsible and responsive stewards?
Oh, steward. Okay, as in with the regulations that was put out by the SAA. Good question.
I mean, one of the things that I was mentioning is, to me, when I read through the statement, it seems to suggest that it's, at least in their view, and maybe that was because it was, you know, a document put together by numerous people, but that it was stating that really that has to do with whether the collection was acquired legally or not. And one of my points was, I think it actually has to go a little bit beyond that. I think that you have to have conversations with people and find out if they've had, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, the aha moment, where they've sort of realized that when they need to understand context, and they need to understand that when something is removed, we don't get a second shot at that. And so they need to have come to the realization that that is an important thing, and that that we need to document. And so to me, that's like really one of the key things is for responsibility. And then the other piece of it that I mentioned was conservation, right? A lot of folks haven't given a really long-term thought to conservation of the artifacts. At least I know we are confronted all the time with conservation attempts that are just terrifying to a professional conservationist. So, you know, people that are at least thinking about and having conversations about, well, can I actually care for this collection, and have I taken care to preserve the context of these finds? Those are two key things to look at. But nobody's wearing signs out there.
Good, good.
So the second part of that was if there was a list of organizations that provide training, maybe something at the SAA, or maybe something that the SAA or the SHA could consider developing.
Would that be for archaeologists working with metal detectorists, or for metal detectorists, or for both?
So that would be, I guess, for anyone, I guess, anyone who is interested in this, who might want to get more training to know maybe get that aha moment or know kind of what you've been working with your program, Matt, the kind of broader training?
We have thank you. We have programs like that. We have a archaeological technician program, which it costs all of $50, and you're mentored by a professional archaeologist. It usually takes a couple of years, but you're mentored by a professional archaeologist during the whole time. You have reading lists, which are quite good, and you're also required to have field experience. That would not require a metal detecting equipment, so that or you could come to a field. You can come to a field session. It costs $25 a day, up to $75 for 11 days. You won't be spending $2,000 or $3,000 like at Crow Canyon. And it's there. We have opportunities like that. We have opportunities to hear speakers. This Saturday we have an online symposium that will include Dr. Jim Adavazio of the Metacroft fame, Henry Miller of St. Mary's City, world-renowned historical archaeologist, and others. There are lots of this sort of thing. We have journals, we have a newsletter. There are lots of places and the people to talk to get it from our viewpoint. One other thing, Jessica, really fast, is that one of the things that I think maybe to me, people don't understand how much money it takes to put an archaeological dig in the field, even a fairly modest one. It can be $10,000 or $20,000. Our 11-day field session, and we get a lot of things thrown in for free, can be $10,000 to $20,000. And so think about if some of these sites are deflated by having been picked over and over and over and over, and yes, there may be features down there, but are they going to tell us enough to warrant the actual cost? I mean, this is a factor too. One last thing, that is that I'm not sure this was the right question here. I think there was the bigger question. I think it's, as you probably gathered from my talk, I think it's fairly limited. Now, I'm not as familiar with metal detector stuff, to be perfectly honest, but I think that we should be concentrating on who we really want to be collaborating with and who we have the most in common with. We deal with limited resources. Once they're, as Matt said, once they're messed with, the information's gone. Nothing can replace it. And look at the environmental groups. Look at the people dealing in soil management. Look at the people looking at the erosion on here in Maryland. All sorts of people that are in the same fields, are looking out at the same landscapes, who see things that that would interest us. We see things that maybe that could interest them. So the state extension service has a lot of these kinds of things and people. That there are a lot of people we could cooperate with a higher rate of return on our investments. That's how I see it. Anyway.
Okay. I would like to make one point, Claude, is that your group, the Archaeological Society of Maryland, is a really strong group. I come at it from other states, from working one in Virginia, working one in Delaware, and you're really well supported by professionals, very well supported by the State Historic Preservation Office. They put on a great show, great presentations. You've got chapters all over the state. So I urge anybody who's interested to, again, as Matt said, look at Google Archaeology Maryland and look up the chapter. It's really easy. It's great to get into. And it's very important.
Craig, I forgot one very important group, and that's Preservation Maryland, who I think we want to have. I think this is very good what they've been doing with their collaboration with CUFMA, and And I hope it's the beginning of a very, very good relationship with all of us.
Thank you.
What we've found with working with metal detectorists, I mean, we have not, the number of metal detectorists we've had come through our program is somewhere in the area of about 125 to 150 individuals. And what most of those folks are interested in is finding a way to collaborate with archaeologists and have, find archaeologists that are interested in meeting them where they're at, which is, helping them with surveys, being part, like what Scott mentioned, is being part of a team and being appreciated. And I feel like that's something that as archaeologists we could really take advantage of. And what I would love to see SAA and SHA do, especially SHA, is to have a more public focused set of web resources where if you're a metal detectorist, you can go on the site and see, what groups are out there, what archaeologists are out there that are interested in working with metal detectorists. I think there could be a lot more collaboration. And for a lot of the metal detectorists that have left our program just with a week, they've actually been brought on as either volunteers with nonprofit archaeological groups or brought on with the archaeologists that they met at cultural resource firms to help with supervised surveys, not going and doing the surveys on their own, but working side by side with archaeologists to help out with surveys. And this is something that just has not really been tapped into. Right? There, like everyone is saying here, there's a range of metal detectorists that are out there, but there's enough metal detectorists that are interested in working with us, the archaeology community, that we could take a big step in terms of finding inroads in with metal detecting clubs and doing what, like the thing that Scott does is you get a few people in there who hear other metal detectorists, talking about what archaeology does and how bad it is, and then speak up and say, well, actually, I've worked with archaeologists and it's not that way. That all of a sudden we'll have a lot more collaboration and a lot more conversations happening. It only takes one member of and there are the most metal detectorists are part of metal detecting clubs, and a lot of them are organized around dealers, metal detector dealers. It only takes one metal detectorist in a metal detecting club to really turn the tide on how archaeology is perceived, and it's more important than just making us archaeologists look good, like good people. It's making helping metal detectorists understand why we do what we do. It's not just for, a pointy-headed academic pursuit. It's for understanding and preserving the past that's out there. And metal detectorists and archaeologists, a lot of metal detectorists share that same desire to preserve the past. They're going at it in a different way. I mean, there are others that are into selling it, but as Scott will probably let you know, there's like, at least for historical archaeology, you're not going to be making a living off of selling historic artifacts. And we're talking about metal detectorists here. This is not, the UK. This is not Europe. The kind of metal artifacts that are out there are quite limited. But there's a lot of chance for collaboration and teamwork.
Well, one of the things about like what you're just saying about not going to make a living at it, actually, in my experience, when the detecting community is exposed, their aha moment is when they can look at the overhead scatter chart of the data that they've collected. So they may be able to hold another mercury dime that they've held 500 of, and they've sort of, the thrill is gone. But when you zoom out to 500 feet above the site and you see a artifact scatter that you've contributed to with the accuracy, and it tells a whole new story, a new layer of information is exposed, your name was part of that. And that is better than finding any single artifact. And I just think a lot of relic hunters need to cross that line. They need to see that moment, that aha moment that says, okay, I don't need to find another one of those or another one of those, but look at what they have discovered here, and it was published, and my name was on the published document. It was like, my photos were there. I was part of it. But that there is a moment that most relic hunters never get to see. And that's when the data comes together, when the team groups together in front of the governor of your state winning an award for archaeology. They never get to see that kind of thing. All they hear is the archaeologists have one piece of advice, and that is find another hobby.
Yeah, no, that's a very productive story, and we'd like to continue on various levels and in various states. We've tried to do that in other states too, and with success. No, you're right. I've worked with Bravo. We've done that. Oh, it's great work with them over in the Delaware Valley and things like that. So that's I strongly recommend it. Do you think of other strategies we could use? Because right now, a lot of times we work with battlefields, but what can we do with Native American sites? Is there ways we can work together with something like that? You know, because we're all kind of focusing on metal. Can we work with native sites? Can we do something to preserve that? I'd like to figure out a way to do that. I think using the handheld on the phone app is a great start. That'd be really good. But the other question that comes about is, what should private property owners do if they find artifacts on their land? What would be the proper stewardship that you'd want them to do? Anybody?
Well, I think we would. Go ahead.
I mean, I think it would matter if they've invited like a metal detectorist to come help. That might affect how I answered it. I get asked by property owners because they hear about me on news or whatever, and then they're like, could you come check this out? Well, I usually don't, but that is a question that people ask, because they may be not equipped, or maybe older, or in some cases they're actually just worried that their estate is going to fall into the hands of a bunch of relic hunters. Whereas if they work with someone responsible now while they're around, that they might actually be able to be good stewards and have the information back into the scholarly network.
That'd be good. Yeah. When I used to work as a state archaeologist, one of the things we'd get were widows coming up and trying to donate their collection to us, to the state repository, because basically they wanted to do something positive with the legacy of their husband that they love so much. And the artifacts weren't doing any good on the mantle, but when they come to the state without any context, we can't accept them. We can't curate them without context. So that was one of these tragedies that we'd see all the time. When you don't have the context, we have nothing with that. We know it's from somewhere in the East Coast. That's all we knew. So it would be really good to get the message out there and work with the context in this. So we'll see what we can do. Now,
yeah, I was going to add a little bit, Craig. The you know, an example of a situation just like this that recently came up was the Barwick's Ordinary site. So this was a site that is on the Eastern Shore near Denton, and the property owners were making some landscaping changes on their property, digging with some heavy equipment, and all of a sudden, scoop full of soil they pulled out. There's bricks, there's colonial artifacts, and all kinds of things starting to trickle out of there. So they already had a large back dirt pile. They just stopped. They stopped what they were doing, fortunately, and they contacted the local historical society, who contacted a local archaeologist, who then contacted our office. So it was kind of a circuitous route, but eventually we were contacted. If people find artifacts and they have questions about it, we're happy to field those questions at any time. They can reach out to us. But this was a site where it turns out it's pretty important. After going out there and doing some remote sensing out there, our office went out and did magnetic susceptibility, ground penetrating radar, and gradiometry there. Found a relatively intact cellar and privy. Showed the property owners what we were looking at, and we're like, we think there's a lot more. There was a little bit of damage done by the backhoe, but most of the site looks like it's intact. helped them record a new site number, and then we had a very small excavation partnering with the Archaeological Society of Maryland and some Washington College students in March, sort of a brief ground truthing excavation, and determined that those features are in fact intact and are there. And Washington College will be having their field school there this summer. Fortunately, we have a very property owners that were very interested in history, and you know, I think the husband was operating the backhoe, and the wife saw the artifacts and started, no, stop. And fortunately, that happened. It doesn't always end up that way, but yeah, our office is always ready and willing to hear you know, things that people have found on their property, even if they just think they're artifacts. I made a joke earlier about pointy rocks. We get a lot of those, but you know, it's part of the job, and we're happy to look at things that people think might be artifacts if it leads to good research, like what happened with Barwick's Ordinary.
Yes, that's a great project. And in fact, I think the Virginians had one just further down the Eastern Shore as well, down towards Accomack. So we've had some really great projects like that. Sometimes I think some of the best things that we professionals can do is support the societies that support the amateur community. And a lot of effort has been put into it. We've had a lot of speakers and a lot of projects that we run, and we still do. And I work, and we have some really wonderful people in Delaware and Virginia and Pennsylvania who've done this quite a bit, as well as New Jersey. We've helped each other out quite a bit. So I think that is a good solution somehow to get more support for those societies. You know, here we are. I'm thinking, I'm sure maybe we'll get a stampede on people attending these societies. And, you know, can they handle it? I hope so, and I hope we do get that stampede going. That would be. Go ahead.
One thing about us that adding on to what Matt was saying, you know, there could be, this is a brainstorm, there could be a role for trained amateurs to play in the cases where destruction is imminent on a site and there are no resources available from the professional community to go. And I've seen it many times here in Kentucky. There's a throw up the hands. We don't have anybody to look at that site. Now, we don't want to turn everyone loose on it, but there could be, if you had phone numbers of people who have been through programs like Matt's or others, or at Montpelier, and possibly have the resolution of your data set is not going to be as good as if you had a team there for 10 weeks. We know that, but it could be that you could have a fairly good record, something sufficient to stitch together other pieces of information about that area from amateurs.
And I think
there's actually, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, just to add on what you're saying, Scott, is to look at this as a little more of a meta process, is working with metal detectorists and other amateur historians to get them to understand what we're after as archaeologists, to get a better understanding of what the importance of site location and site recording is, because that's, you know, we need a larger constituency to have more state laws, not necessarily federal laws, because that's not how this country works. It's state laws that allow for preservation to happen. And the only way to do that is to get more people understanding what archaeology is and why we do what we do, and what the importance of our, you know, archaeological resources are. As you all know, there's you know, when it comes to historic resources, what most people think of is architecture and not archaeology. And that's seen as what is an intact resource, where we know that there's plenty of intact resources with archaeology, but we need to get that across. So there's looking at some of what other fields have done. My son is in fish biology, and he's grew up seeing, you know, me working with metal detectorists and some of the conversations I've come home with on both sides. And he's been in fish biology for about 5 years, and he was like, Dad, you know, if we treated fisher folk, you know, folks that are sport fisher people, the way that archaeologists treat metal detectorists, there wouldn't be a single Clean Water Act in this country, because what has driven the Clean Water Act has not been, you know, scientific study of fish, but more sports fishery for, you know, the hook and bullet crab, not the research crowd. So it's something to look at in terms of, you know, how other disciplines have done this in terms of collaborating with avocational groups.
Good point.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, Scott, your last comment, we did get a question about people that have, for sites where there aren't funding to do the digs. We did get a question about the availability, or a comment about the availability of people to be able to go out there that have an interest in that history and are interested in being stewards. And we did also kind of touch on, we got a couple questions in here, and I just have to say, we're getting so many questions. We really appreciate it. If we can't get to them all, I'm going to send these out to the panelists and certainly get all your feedback. And I know that there's some people that are interested in collaborating on projects. So yeah, I will make sure that this all gets out to the panelists. But there have been a couple of questions about geophysical survey and the question of artifacts versus broader kind of archaeological features that came up in one context with pre-contact sites. The other one just in like, does this impact, change the impact, I guess, of collecting if you're looking at kind of the broader feature landscape versus the individual collection landscape. So I didn't know if there was anyone who wanted to speak to that, as we do more and more people start off with geophysical survey.
Rephrase the question about geophysical survey.
Sure, absolutely. And actually, I'm just going to go ahead and read. So we've gotten a couple of different versions. So I'm going to read the more in-depth one, just because I think that will be a better one. So they're saying the future of archaeology is in using geophysical survey in detecting anomalies likely to be cultural features that yield important information. Collectors are basically irrelevant in this process. Is Maryland still focusing on surface collecting or shovel pit testing when geophysical survey is a better best practice for detecting features? And the other way this came up, like I said, was in pre-contact sites. You know, please address the collecting of pre-contact artifacts from the surface versus feature locations. So any feedback on that?
Yeah, just I would say how metal detecting is used, I would say properly by archaeology, isn't finding artifacts, you know, and digging every artifact up. It's using it as a remote sensing tool. When we do gridded metal detector surveys, the only artifacts we sample are just enough to understand that the signals that we're getting aren't, say, a shredded can from the lawnmower, but they're a historic artifact. And then the rest of those artifacts we leave buried, and actually bury back the metal artifacts that we find. How we do the 10-foot metal, 20 meter and 10-foot metal detector surveys is for the 20-meter metal detector surveys, finding the sites, the artifacts that are uncovered in the field are photographed and then immediately reburied so they can be recovered in an excavation unit. And then the rest are, you know, auditorily located and then mapped in the 20-meter grid. So essentially our metal detector surveys are, they're geophysical remote sensing surveys. So it's part of you know, and the only way we're able to locate the kind of sites we're after, like short-term occupation slave quarters, work sites for barns and other areas, there's no, you know, GPR, other resistivity type surveys, remote sensing surveys would not pick those up. It's the metal detector surveys as a remote sensing device that allows those to be picked up. So I'd say it's part of this remote sensing arsenal.
Yeah, a lot of the artifacts or what Matt's looking at are things in the plow zone, and it's not really in a feature. So you could use GPR to find features, but these scatters aren't really in that, and we're looking at the scatters themselves. And so we're looking using either just shovel test pits or metal detectors to find the scatters themselves. And a lot of the sites he's talking about, they won't leave subsurface features, and so really that's all you got to really work with that.
And they won't show up in a shovel test pit survey. I mean, with a tobacco barn, you're lucky if you find one nail on a 20-foot survey.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
Oh, and the right word for that shredded can, Matt, is can slaw.
Oh, yeah, it is true. Can slaw is the perfect term.
Yeah.
I have an entire glossary on the website of all the language the detectorists use. If you ever want to brush up.
I'll do that. Thanks, Scott.
Maybe we can add.
I was going to add that, you know, the higher end remote sensing techniques, so to speak, the gradiometers, the ground penetrating radars, they're not appropriate for a lot of sites because it would be too time consuming to collect the data. You know, wooded sites are an easy example of that. So that's where, you know, shovel testing in the old days might be what you turn to, but metal detecting, if it's historic stuff that you're looking for, might be the best technique because you can work around trees. You know, so there's a lot of cases where that would be preferable, or the only thing that's possible because, you know, running a GPR, I've run GPR in the woods and it ain't fun. So.
You know, that's a good point about the woods. I was involved in a project where an entire section of woods was declared, I think they used the word sterile, is that right? It was declared done, and I just said, well, why don't you let me spend the afternoon on it? And I think we ended up with about 60 artifacts from it. So don't ever, and so a lot of detectorists are actually very good in the woods. We've learned how to get around that with our little tiny hockey puck coils and things like that. So it is very good for woodland sensing.
I do want to give, because I'm trying to kind of get the questions that maybe got asked in a few different ways before we have to go. We just got a couple minutes. There was a question about engagement of native tribes in the process with archaeological digs. So I was hoping you could address how you do engage when you are doing pre-contact sites, how you engage native population in those digs.
Claude,
it looks like you're muted.
There we go. Hear me now?
Yeah.
Sounds like a commercial. I'm a commissioner on the Maryland Commission for Indian Affairs, as well as the president of the Archaeological Society of Maryland. We are extremely interested in increasing the participation of Native people in those sorts of excavations. I also wanted to make a point of for instance, Native people are free, come in free to all of our events, including our field session, and it's anyone who self-identifies. And we make that as broadly understood as possible. And we have members that are Native Americans. That was a long, slow process, but they began to come into our fold slowly but surely, and I think it's working pretty well. I'd like to have more of them, but it's working pretty well. The other thing, there was a group that was set up to deal with issues of burials and bodies that were in the possession of the state of Maryland. By bodies, I mean the skeletons, of course. And you know, it took 5 years to come up with a solution on how they could be, what would be an appropriate place of repose for these people. And that, I think, helped increase their, because it was half archaeologists and half Native people, and a lot of those people began to show a more active interest in archaeology. Just one other quick thing. One thing I would recommend for all of this, if it could ever be done, and I'm not sure it could in America, but the portable antiquities scheme in Britain, along with the Treasure Act, I think would be a very, very useful thing. But it's that's a voluntary, except for the Treasure Act, which is part of British law. The portable antiquities scheme is voluntary. And as we've seen with mask and such things in this country, it would be very difficult to enforce and to even have such programs instituted. Oh, the one other thing, you were talking about pre-contact work. Don't assume that there's no metal. You get an ossuary, you're going to find copper in there, especially if you've got something that's giving you a reading at 1 meter. And ossuaries are not uncommon in the state, for instance, in the state of Maryland, but you may have hundreds of individuals buried. So, you know, the metal detectors could be very useful there, and they very easily could stumble on such a site, and their interference in that site would be taken very, very seriously by Native people, even if it was accidental. So just letting you know.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question.
Well, I think we're at 2:30, so we are at time. But we did actually, Claude, it's funny you said the British law. We did get a couple questions in here about British law, so I will pass these all on to the panelists, and I really appreciate. I think I know this is our most busy question chat we've had the entire of any of our webinars. So I really appreciate it. And I don't know, Stephanie, did you want to say anything in closing from the Council for Maryland Archaeology?
Well, I just want to thank you again, Preservation Maryland, for hosting this, for supporting this, and you know, our panelists. It was a wonderful conversation, and I personally could continue this, and I hope that we do. You know, I think we just see this as kind of you know, another step in the road. So you know, it was a great talk. I appreciate all of your thoughts, and Craig, thank you so much for moderating. Yeah, and again, we have one more webinar in our series, and it's next Thursday at 2 o'clock, the Archaeology of Healing and Medicine. You can find the link on our website and the Council for Maryland Archaeology website. I hope to see some of you there. Thank you.
And I want to thank
Guys.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just want to thank the panel for coming up and for taking time and really getting involved. I did a lot of prep work, and I enjoyed all of your thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And I just want to echo, yeah, I want to echo the thanks to the panel, and thank you to the Council for Maryland Archaeology for partnering with us on this. It's just been really fantastic. And just as a final reminder, this was a question that came up a couple times. And so just to reiterate, we are recording this session, and a recording will be sent out hopefully sometime next week. And you are welcome to share that. So anyone who is registered is on the list to get that recording. So yeah, please keep an eye on your inbox for that from Preservation Maryland.